It looks like we got a fair number of people in, so I'll get started. Hello, I'm Jack Graves, author of the best reviewed Amazon book, After the Angels. Although a new version's coming out with a nicer cover fairly soon. So if you want to wait for that, I don't blame you. Although these older cover ones could be collectible now, or eventually. But so today I'm going to be talking about the issues with character motivation in a post-scarcity society. And to start with, it's basically so post-scarcity is kind of what it says on the tin. It's a point in like societal development where there is no longer a need to ration resources the same way we do right now. And it can be anything from kind of just like basically present day technology, but with a more even distribution of resources to like far future space guide AIs. Um, and I should probably mention, I'm going to mention Star Trek a fair amount because it's kind of the main cultural touchstone that we have of a post-scarcity sci-fi series. But as a bunch of writers during the history of Star Trek have found, it can be quite difficult to make certain types of stories work in a post-scarcity society, particularly the more Star Wars end of stories, stuff about uh, kind of lower income people, like the stereotypical like gentlemen thieves and rogues, because if you no longer have a bunch of starving orphans to feed with your ill-gotten gains, you stop being a like heroic thief with a heart of gold and just start being kind of a dickhead. Um, so that's pretty much what I'm going to be talking about because to me, one of the most important things in fiction is to have characters with realistic seeming motivations because you can make pretty much any sort of ridiculous universe work, provided that the people in it come off as real. Whereas, some very believable kind of hard sci-fi universes can come off as unbelievable if the bad guys are just doing stuff because they're evil rather than out of any real necessity. Um, so pretty much like I said, the main cultural touchstone people have for post scarcity is Star Trek. In the future with Starfleet and the Federation, they have replicators that can produce pretty much anything. They're kind of an extreme example of post-scarcity because a lot of lower tech possibilities exist for post-scarcity, kind of, uh, universal basic income, universal social housing, universal, free food rationing. But in Star Trek, they can pretty much convert energy directly into matter and make whatever they want, apart from platinum for some reason. But that's kind of a workaround to enable certain types of stories to work. But I'll get into that. So the Federation can produce whatever they want whenever they want. Everyone who's a citizen of it can have a comfortable life. So what motivates people to join Starfleet and risk their lives, go away from home? Because while Starfleet's kind of only like a semi-military organization, a lot of the things that motivate a volunteer military in our society are stuff like access to college, uh, salaries, all that sort of stuff. So the carrot that's used to get you to do something unpleasant is some manner of relief of your material needs. But if you know, can sit on the sofa all day and have your material needs taken care of, why would you go into Starfleet? And for the main point of view characters we have, the motivation's pretty obvious. You're exploring new worlds, going on adventures, humanitarian relief. But what motivates someone to do the kind of crappier background jobs on the Starship Enterprise? Because there's like a lot of people on that ship, and only about 5 or 6 of them ever get to see any of the alien worlds they go to. So, I imagine they have automatically cleaning toilets, but someone has to maintain the automatically cleaning toilets. So why would you ever decide to go and clean toilets on a spaceship when you could be cleaning your own toilet at home? But so that's always been kind of a suspension of disbelief thing. You just assume that there's some kind of societal etiquette or societal values that are different to our own. But for us, sometimes that can be hard to empathize with. Whereas, you definitely like because you can create a society where people are motivated to do whatever, because that's just what the society set up to do. But that doesn't always come off as believable to us because we obviously are kind of shaped by the society we live in. So the concept of, sometimes we have difficulty relating to other real world cultures because their values are quite different, sometimes. So to rely completely on a society where it's considered the highest form of valor to go and clean toilets on a spaceship is not always going to be the absolute best option for you. Um, Sorry, I'm just checking my notes. Uh, so the because of that the way the Star Trek universe is set up, it innately limits kind of the Star Wars style stories of like scuzzy criminals and like Han Solos and so if you notice on the like newer Star Trek shows like Discovery, sometimes they kind of ignore the post-scarcity aspect. So you have like there's a scene in Picard where one of the characters has a go at Jean-Luc Picard because he's got a fancy vineyard with antique furniture, and it's like, well, why are you living in a weird tin shack in the future when there's replicators? So to enable that scene, they kind of ignored that aspect of post-scarcity, and kind of artificial limitation to post-scarcity is a way around things because so while you may have, because if we're looking at a kind of a more realistic scenario than just the computer that prints out what you say to it verbally, in the real world, a kind of post-scarcity society, like a lower tech one than Star Trek, would be kind of very advanced 3D printers connected to some like elemental feedstock, which the machine would then assemble stuff out of, various parts. And so those machines require some sort of file or blueprint or recipe to print from. And so while the materials may be free, um, the recipes and that kind of intellectual property may not be free. So while you might have access to, free food, free furniture, free clothes, there'll be the future equivalent of kind of store brand stuff. Whereas if you want, something nicer, something fancier, something more tasty, um, you're going to have to get that blueprint from someone. And in an extreme case, because there's no longer any need to, um, because like right now, when someone invents something, their impulse is to find a way to monetize and market it, which innately involves some form of distribution of it. Whereas in the future, if you already have all your needs taken care of, uh, people might hold on to innovations. It's kind of an extreme example, But if say there was a disease that hadn't had a cure discovered for it yet, and someone discovered a cure but was a bit of a dick, they could just hold on to it, uh, and extort people that way. So kind of that's where the gentleman thief archetype returns. You could have a protagonist whose entire goal is to sneak into this guy's house and uh, download his vaccine recipe onto a memory stick, and then distribute it to the suffering masses. And but then you have to get into what would motivate the doctor to do that. Sorry, I'm just noticing I missed a comment.
No
Or
problem.
just
I just tossed that in there real fast.
no worries. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think that is a good point that standards of living would not necessarily be uniform, because at the end of the day, in a world where production capacity is finite, and obviously production capacity will be apportioned in some manner amongst the populace, you have to get into kind of who is being apportioned what and on what basis. So there can still be societal inequity, but it's less in terms of who has the most money and more in terms of who has the most ability to requisition goods. And we saw that kind of thing in an extreme fashion in like the Soviet Union, where although, everyone was entitled to a free house and a free car and, free food, how long it would take to get that stuff and what quality of that stuff would be a huge gulf between the up higher ups in the party and the average person. So the average person could wait for 10 years to get like a Trabant or something, whereas the party officials would have a new knockoff Rolls Royce every year. So that is still another thing. Another angle to go down is, and that's something I'll touch on in a little bit, like systems, like compelling systems for how uh, stuff would be distributed. Um, but so to go back to the doctor, obviously it's like a cartoonishly evil example because why would a guy become a doctor just to um, create a vaccine and then artificially limit it? And then you get into what economy would replace kind of the current capital economy. And so various people have proposed, and some anarcho-communists have proposed this sincerely for real life, a kind of reputation-based system. So rather than, you know, uh, earning money and then spending that money, you would, through your deeds, through entertaining people, through public service, you would build up kind of a reputation score, and that would, you know, uh, be either different tiers or it would be like a just a number, and that like so people could say, well, I only want my clothes to be worn by people with a very high reputation. So to get my, designer clothing schematics, you have to have this reputation. To eat my food, you have to have this reputation. And so society itself would shift to, from a focus on productivity and how much, capital your labor generates, it would shift to kind of how much attention you can get people to pay to you. And we've seen the very start of a system like that with the rise of Instagram influencers and people like that. It's always been there at a kind of a low level with celebrity, but in the past, celebrities had to actually do something as well as be a celebrity. But now you can become an influencer and get free stuff from brands and make a living just through people looking at you. And so if you imagine the nightmarish world where like that's how all of society works, there's not an option to, just be a boring guy who plugs away at an office job. If you want anything, you have to be an attention-grabbing, individual. And we've seen in the past couple of years the extremely high rate of like emotional burnout for YouTube celebrities, Twitch streamers, Instagram influencers. So in a lot of ways, like a reputation-based system like that, although it might sound like a more true meritocracy on the surface, because obviously there's a reputation for good deeds as well as um, being in pictures on Instagram. But so it could seem like a good idea, but when you get down to it, it would be pretty nightmarish to live in kind of a surveillance state, basically like that, where you know having upsetting the wrong person could tank your reputation, and then you don't have like money to fall back on. You're back to store brand food, um, which is sometimes better than brand food in real life, but I don't know how good uh, soda that comes out of a machine would be, or a 3D printer rather. Soda comes out of a machine pretty frequently in real life. Um, so a reputation-based society would be a pretty fertile ground for any type of story, and it would be pretty easy to empathize with someone living in that society and their motivations, because it's barely, kind of distinct from how we live now. It's just a little bit more managed and, formalized, whereas right now, kind of influence and celebrity are kind of informalized. There's no number to go with it. And you can still be a business guy and never be seen by a camera and have billions. But so to go back to the doctor again, I keep getting off this doctor, but so the example I was going to use is one of the main reasons that a doctor would want to release that vaccine in that type of society is obviously releasing a vaccine for a deadly disease would be a substantial boost to your reputation score. Um, but let's say that, you know, the guy is, sociopathic in a way and wants to milk the most amount of reputation out of this vaccine that he can. And so decides that, hey, I'm only gonna, in order to rub shoulders with more famous people than me and provide a larger boost to my reputation, I'm gonna release the vaccine in waves to, from the top down, so that I get in pictures with lots of celebrities, and you see people do that in real life, kind of like just in our current situation, you see the disparity between the availability of rapid testing for normal people and celebrities. So while it sounds like within a fictional setting, it sounds more ridiculous because, it's a made up situation, but in real life, it's just as extant, but it's, like, I forget who said it, but, you know, in many ways, fiction has to be more believable than nonfiction, because nonfiction, being real, can get away with a lot of cheesy coincidences and outrageous deeds, whereas if you wrote some of the stuff that happens now down in a book, people would consider it to be basically parody. um, but to get back to um, post scarcity and intellectual property, we've seen to an extent post scarcity for certain goods because of the kind of digital revolution, where like with my beautiful book, um, I have effectively an infinite warehouse of ebooks. Um, and basically the reason I sell them rather than just letting people have the file all the time for free is that I need to eat food and to live somewhere, unfortunately. So, hi. But sorry, I just completely forgot what I was saying. But so in like a post-scarcity society would be one that would depend a lot more on intellectual property than, physical property, because everything would be fairly producible from. Hi, someone's got a question.
Yes. I was wondering, like, do you think that there's different types of a post-scarcity society? Like there can be one where everyone is assured medical care, a roof over their heads, and basic nutrition. But if you want anything more than that, like you want a bigger house, better food, um, the ability to go over to travel, let's say. Um, and you'd have to work for it and pay for it with money, as opposed to like the type of one in Star Trek where someone can basically go live in one continent and do their work in another one that's like half a planet away.
Yeah, no, that's definitely uh there's been posited by a fair number of people as basically a form of social democracy, where it's kind of luxury only capitalism, where you are provided with all of the basic necessities of life and healthcare and education. But if you want fancier clothes and if you want, to travel extensively, you want a nicer house, you have to pay for those things with money. So that is kind of basically some countries already almost have that. There are countries in Europe with a much bigger social safety net where effectively you can exist as a person without necessarily having to do anything, and but it's not a tremendously exciting life, because like right now I'm based in England and we've been in various forms of lockdown for most of the year, and I've been on furlough from my day job. So I, like through a government scheme, I receive a percentage of my salary, even though I'm not currently doing my job. So, right now I kind of exist at the pleasure of the government, but I mean, partially from being trapped indoors, it's not a tremendously exciting life, and it does get boring. Although obviously I'm much better off than a lot of people are right now, because hey, there's a second question from Ray Jenkins.
Oh, go ahead and answer the rest of the question if you'd like.
Sure, but yeah, so kind of that is on the more realistic end of a post-scarcity society. So it's barely even sci-fi because it's accomplishable. It's more of the 1984 form of science fiction where it's positing a different, like rather than advanced technology, it's just a different society. And so that is entirely possible, and it would still have basically the same possibilities for stories that our current society does, but it would still kind of, because right now, sort of criminals and, you know, people who like, there are empathetic criminals right now, kind of people who are like forced to steal to eat, who sell drugs to support their families and pay for like medical bills, like in Breaking Bad. It would be difficult to tell a story like Breaking Bad if he was in a different country, which had universal health care. And similarly, it would be difficult to have kind of a uh, empathetic, semi-heroic thief in a society where, he's just stealing because he wants a nicer car rather than stealing to live. So I think that sort of situation, it does impact the sort of stories you can tell and still have a character be empathetic. Although I think in that situation, it would be much easier to understand someone who lives in, very shitty accommodation, eats, not great food, and, has limited travel and limited prospects in terms of what they can do for recreation. So you could understand someone like that, becoming a thief to get by on a little more, but it becomes kind of almost a situation like when we had rationing in England during the war, during World War II. People would turn to becoming black market sellers and stuff to get a bit more than what their ration book would allow them. But unfortunately, well, for them, rather than being seen as kind of empathetic rogues, they were just seen as you know kind of stealing from the war effort, whether that was accurate or not. But no, I think that luxury-only capitalism is a big possibility, and it's probably the most likely for a transitional period between a fully capitalist society like ours and a kind of early post-scarcity social democracy situation. Did that answer your question, or was there something else you were looking for? Because I'm happy to elaborate in a different.
That was good. I just wanted to bring up the idea of that. I mean, it doesn't have, we don't have to go all the way to the Star Trek, go up to the replicator. and get the
No,
fancy
definitely.
toy.
There's a huge spectrum of post-scarcity. Everything from, just barely past the present, kind of state apportioned food and housing, all the way up to kind of, post-singularity, like digital immortality, like simulation worlds and stuff. So there is a huge spectrum. Yeah, so if you're all good, I think it was Ray Jenkins who had a question.
Yeah, actually, going back to the example with the doctor who didn't want to release the vaccine. What if there's a situation where you have like the protagonist, the ruffian, with the heart of gold. He comes in and he confronts the doctor, and then the doctor reveals that if he did release it, there would be even worse consequences. And I guess that stems more into like moral quandaries within the post scarcity setting, and like how keeping like the status quo of that post scarcity, like that's something that I'd like to ask about.
Yeah, no, and I think that definitely there exists a pretty good. It would rely on you having a compelling reason why the doctor would not release it. But there is a compelling situation you could have where, it seems like someone is just being completely selfish for no reason. And say, like, even if it wasn't a vaccine, it was, like a new type of more efficient engine, like there's all the stories about kind of like urban legends about like people inventing free energy machines and then well, in the urban legends, being killed by the oil industry. But you could have something where someone had, promoted something like a free energy machine or a vaccine or something revolutionary, who had, demoed it and then discovered horrendous side effects, either, some form of pollution or as there was that COVID vaccine in Russia that like gave people narcolepsy or something. Because it was just rushed out, and so kind of and the other way that the reputation type of system could play into that is that, say, the doctor promoted the vaccine early to receive a boost in his reputation, but then later discovered the horrendous side effects of it, but kept that secret from the public in order to preserve his reputation, because a guy who invents a vaccine and hasn't released it yet is still potentially a hero, whereas a guy who's invented basically an injectable poison is kind of worse than he was before, because now he's giving people false hope. So there's a variety of understandable reasons that someone could not release something in that situation. It just, you would have to come up with a genuinely compelling reason. And I think that, that type of reputation system plays into that heavily, because like we see with various crowdfunding campaigns over the years, or that the Theranos blood testing campaign that received billions in investment capital, but just didn't have a product that worked. But the entire exercise was in publicity and securing that interest, not in delivering a real product. So, the protagonist could get to the doctor's house to steal the vaccine and find that there is no vaccine, and that he was just hoping that in the time he had, he could come up with the vaccine while enjoying the material rewards of his announcement. Uh, does that cover what you're interested in?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Cool. So yeah, just to go into kind of more into the levels of post-scarcity society and kind of the limitations they impose, but the possibilities they open up in terms of character motivations. Because say you go in the luxury only capitalism kind of socialized housing and medicine and basic needs society, you have very similar motivations to the human race now, just with the addition of it kind of cuts off the lower end of like the social standing kind of stories, because you know nobody's living in favelas or picking through trash to make their living. So those types of characters may no longer exist, and so that if you want to do kind of a like a picaresque kind of criminal focused story, it can be more difficult to provide the criminals with an empathetic motivation, and they you go from kind of a morally gray character to just a kind of like selfish person. Um, but then if you move forward uh, and you say you have the Star Trek level culture, you open, space exploration in that setting gives you a wide variety of new motivations and new storytelling things, because you have the desire to explore, whereas right now kind of exploration is only really accessible to people like James Cameron and dedicated research scientists, because of the expenses involved in exploring the places that we've not explored yet on the planet Earth. But in space, assuming like in Star Trek, a reasonably accessible form of space travel, you have an entire like a literal universe of exploration to do and new cultures to contact. So and the other major thing that Star Trek gives, or the Star Trek style setting gives, is you have kind of the humanitarian mission of a post-scarcity society, like a truly post-scarcity society, because a lot of what's referred to as post-scarcity still involves some material scarcity. It's just that no one is completely starving or destitute. Whereas in Star Trek, because they can turn energy into matter, there is no scarcity beyond energy generation, which they also have sorted. So you have the kind of humanitarian missions of a post-scarcity society encountering a lower technology society that's still suffering from problems of scarcity. And so in like Star Trek Voyager, because they are pretty far outside Federation space. They interact with a lot of, scarcity-based societies, and so they are able to do a lot of. They're able to gain a big advantage in kind of negotiation by offering the use of their replicators to produce, scarce goods. Um, but beyond that, uh, you still have war, and it's war is a thing that, like a lot of other motivations, is based at least part in scarcity on Earth. Most wars are fought, whether they're said to be openly or not, they are fought on contests over scarce resources. Access to minerals, to oil, or even in earlier history to arable land. Like part of the reason that the Vikings invaded England uh, in the early part of the AD era, the Common Era. Sorry, I was forgetting the word for it. Was that basically back in Scandinavia, they had too many people and not enough farmland for every family or every community to have their own farmland. So there just wasn't space to grow the food that the people needed. So they sought both trade and kind of imperialism abroad. Um, so because a lot of wars are fought over territories or scarce goods, in a post-scarcity universe, in a sci-fi space travel universe, a lot of the normal motivations for war are absent because space is full of space, uh, as the name would suggest. So uh yes. Sorry, I'm just trying to bring up. Yeah, so Evan, population would definitely play into a post-scarcity narrative, especially oh, good Lord, I've been talking forever. Oh, sorry. Um, so, uh, yeah, so you would, in a post-scarcity world, if you don't have space travel, you would need some form of population control, because if you, if, I mean, I think that to an extent right now, we are just post-scarcity enough to run the risk of the classic Malthusian apocalypse where population gets out of control. But if you if you're a post-scarcity society, and then the risk becomes less, because right now, more people are born than die, so population grows. But in a post-scarcity society, providing and distributing the resources that the planet has to that to an ever larger population would potentially lead to declining standards of living, as population grows, because although each person gets a portion of the planet's manufacturing output and a portion of the planet's space, as the population grows, obviously manufacturing capacity and land space does not increase with that population growth. So at a certain point, people are going to be getting less and less of a portion of the same pie. So just quickly, because I'm running out of time. So motivations for more advanced societies, kind of at a certain level, if you get to the kind of like Clarke's law level of sci-fi, where people have passed the singularity, you run into kind of more fantasy style motivations for things, because if you're immortal and have all of your needs taken care of, at some point you're going to get pretty bored, and so you are going to embark on some sort of endeavor. Then, like I was saying with war, because of the various factors of war being the various kind of casus belli being limited, you would need to find a new justification for war, either like scarcity. You would have to introduce either some form of scarcity or some form of alien psychology that would necessitate a war in a pretty like, you know, a world with abundant territory and abundant resources. So either, you know, a lot of people have used the kind of scarcity of habitable planets to motivate war. You have, like, as Alvarin just mentioned, you have kind of religious motivations, and it seems like as people's kind of survival needs diminish, the importance they put on various kind of social things, whether it's you know, non-material politics or religious motivations or anything like that. So as people no longer look towards their survival as a primary motivation for their lives, they'll seek out some other form of meaning. And so, you know, there could be huge religious conflicts, although that also kind of suffers in a world where, you know, people of different religions could just go and live on another planet. But then you fall into kind of the like the situation we've seen it in real life play out of, you know, we were in this place first, so it belongs to us, and you know, other people saying, you know, that's not the case. Um, you know, the other big thing I wanted to mention is, although even in a world where you have access to, you know, an infinite 3D printer, you'll be limited in, you know, what recipes you can print and what elements you have access to. So someone would have to come up with a certification board for, you know, printable schematics, because someone could potentially print out just a big pile of plutonium, and that would be a major health hazard for people. Or on a less extreme scale, you could have kind of like, as you see in, you know, products from places with laxer manufacturing regulations, you could have people printing out stuff that are full of dangerous chemicals, people that print stuff um, that just harms the environment by its existence. And then you have stuff like, would people be allowed to just print out guns and bombs and fighter jets if they wanted to? And if not, how would they gain access to those things if they wanted them? So a potential track to go down is kind of, rather than a reputation score, kind of a trust score, which is, you know, how much a government or a society believes an individual can be trusted with dangerous things, or, you know, whether they would be trusted to run their own planet or not. So government work, like in Starfleet, could be a track to access to more dangerous things. Um, so if you wanted to found your own colony, you know, they're not just going to let any individual, like any random guy, show up and say, I want, you know, to take a bunch of people off to die in space. You know, they would need some sort of proof or certification. So a motivation for people could be to go and do kind of civil service work or community service work to attain a higher trust level of their society to then get what they want, which would be a reason people might risk their lives. I think we're slowly running out of time. I didn't quite get to everything I intended to because I got very sidetracked by that mysterious doctor. Does anyone have any pressing questions or anything they feel like I missed out? Yeah, and that's a good point from Chicken Heart. If you are in a hard sci-fi universe, which doesn't have faster than light travel, doesn't have faster than light communication, the limit becomes not the materials and not even the intellectual property, but the logistics of providing that to everyone in a spread out kind of galactic union. So, a plague vaccine might be discovered, but it does no good if, the vaccine is, as Chicken Heart said, on the other side of the universe from the recipients. So there are still quite a lot of physical factors that limit things. It just depends on how hard sci-fi you want to be or how high tech you want to be. Um, and but yeah, so I've been through religion, war, civic duty, and aid work. Obviously, people in our world risk their lives to do humanitarian work. Um, that humanitarian work is largely kind of either poverty or war based, so you still run into limitations on the scope of that, depending on how distributed the post scarcity of your fictional world is. Um, you have, potentially gaining access to increased requisition capacity. So rather than, you know, an hour of printer time a week, you could get 2 hours and print out something that takes a lot longer. If any of you are old enough like me to remember when it took all night to download like a 4 MB file, you would have to, uh, you would have to time the things you wanted to download in between people's phone calls and, uh, you know, late at night because it would shut out the entire connection, and if you interrupted the connection, you'd lose all the progress. So, kind of the time it takes to print something would be another factor of how much requisition capacity it would take to get that done. Any other final questions or comments or anything? Um, but yeah, my book is in the well. There's elements of post scarcity because it's set in basically a world that operates on the principles of reality as laid down in kind of the Jewish Kabbalah. So while the world resembles our real world, it operates on different physical principles. And the main thrust of the story is that kind of biblical style angels have come back and waged war on humanity. And um, effectively, to try and shortcut a lot of human nature to curb on, evil activities and violence. Surviving humans exist in kind of, angel-run cities where, like, in Exodus, there's like manna from heaven. So all of their food needs, all of their housing needs are taken care of, specifically to curb kind of humanity's more sinful impulses. So you can still run into post-scarcity stuff in non-science fiction settings or different speculative fiction settings. Just in the same way you'd have 3D printers in our world, you could have even a world where like necromancy is legal and everything is constructed by zombies as an infinite labor pool. So there are, or just in a D&D world where people have realized that if you just trained everyone to be a level 1 wizard, everyone could cast prestidigitation and like Goodberry all day and never have to eat, never have to work to eat, rather.
Very good. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but I do want
No
to thank
problem.
you, Jack Graves, for presenting on the panel. We do
Thank you all for listening. I hope it wasn't too rambling.
No, of course not. No, that was fantastic. I learned a lot. Thank you for answering my question, everyone's questions. We do have a Discord channel open if you'd like to migrate over there to continue the
Yeah, no,
conversation.
definitely. If anyone has any further questions, I'll be over there. Yeah, thank you all for listening, and thank you to Breezycon for having me. It's been a great opportunity, and I've had a good time rambling in front of a camera. So hopefully see you all soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.